The music inside the Okonkwo mansion was so loud you could feel it in your ribs. 43 guests had turned out that Friday evening in their finest agbada in deep burgundy, silk jail piled high, gold and diamonds earning their keep under 3 chandeliers. It was the kind of party Lagos society saves its best sentences for. Nobody wanted to be the one who had not been there. Esenwosu had worked inside that house for 9 years. She knew which floorboard near the pantry groaned at midnight. She knew how the late Mama Okonkwo liked her tea 2 sugars. Never milk, always the white enamel cup, and she knew every room in that compound by its particular smell and its particular silence. Tonight, she had not come to serve. She had come to keep a promise. She crossed the floor, holding a small gift in both hands, brown paper, a length of string. Nothing about it was trying to impress anyone. Ronke Adeyemi looked at it, then at ease. Then she turned to the guests standing nearest to her and smiled. God forbid. Her voice did not even rise. You brought me a gift in this wrapping? My sister is this newspaper. She lifted the box to show the people around her, the way you hold up something absurd. Then she let it fall. It hit the marble floor and the contents scattered. 30 people watched. The music kept playing. If you are watching this right now, drop a comment below and tell me where you are and what time it is in your city. I want to know who is here with me tonight. And if you are new to this channel, please subscribe right now, because what was inside that box is about to leave nobody in that room standing. Stay with me. This story is only just beginning. To understand what that box contained, and why the woman who threw it was about to lose everything she had spent 2 years building, we have to go back. Not far. Only 7 months and 11 days before that Friday evening, to a bedroom at the end of the 3rd corridor in this same house, where a woman was dying the way good people sometimes die. Quietly, with her affairs in order, and with one final thing left to do. But before that, let us talk about the party itself, and who was in the room, and why it mattered. The Okonkwo engagement celebration had been Ronke Adeyemi's project from the afternoon. Tunde placed a ring on her finger in the garden terrace of the Echo Hotel. She had hired a decorator from Abuja, a man named Desmond, who charged 1,430,000 naira for 3 days of work, and arrived with a full team and a very specific vision involving peonies and suspended glass installations. She had selected each course on the menu herself. 5 in total, with paired wines brought in from a supplier in Victoria Island, whose import license she had confirmed personally. She had printed the invitation cards on cream stock with gold foil lettering, sent with exactly 3 weeks' notice, because she understood that the timing of an invitation is itself a social message. Tunde Okonkwo had agreed to all of it. He was not a passive man, but he was a man who had grown up watching a woman of strong authority run everything around her with a quietness that made other people's noise seem unnecessary. His mother had been that woman. He was accustomed to capable women managing important things, and there was something in Ronke's attention to detail that reminded him, not quite consciously, of that household competence he had grown up beside. He had not yet asked himself whether the capability and the warmth were the same thing. He would understand the difference before this evening was over. Esenwosu arrived at the gate of the Okonkwo compound on a Wednesday morning in March. 9 years and 4 months before that engagement party. She was 18 years old, wearing a green Ankara blouse that her late aunt had sewn for her, carrying a bag that held 3 changes of clothes, 1 pair of good sandals with a small crack in the left heel, and a letter of recommendation from the pastor of her church in Eket that described her as a young woman of outstanding character and diligent disposition. The gate man studied her. "Who send you?" "I am looking for work," she said. "I heard this family needs house help." "Who tell you that?" She gave the name of a woman who sold tomatoes at the market on Adesanya Street, who had overheard two of the Okonkwo house staff talking about the previous housekeeper leaving to follow her husband to Abuja. The gate man looked at her for another long moment. Then he pushed the gate open, and she walked through. Mama Okonkwo, whose full name was Adunola Okonkwo, though only her late husband had called her that, and only in private, was in the kitchen when the gate man brought Ease in. She was standing at the far counter, overseeing the preparation of egusi soup for a luncheon she was hosting that afternoon, and she did not look up immediately. When she did, she gave the girl standing in the doorway the same steady attention she gave to everything she needed to make a decision about. Not a quick scan, not a dismissal. A real look, the kind that takes its time. "How old are you?" Mama asked. 18, Ma. "From where?" "Eket, Ma." "Your parents?" Ease did not flinch. "Both gone, Ma. My father when I was 11, my mother when I was 15. The kitchen was quiet. The cook kept stirring. "Who are you staying with now?" "My aunt. But she passed in January." "Ma, I have no one here." Mama Okonkwo was still for a moment. She looked at this young woman who had arrived at her gate with the church letter, a cracked sandal, and no one in the world, and she did not say the thing people always say in those moments. "The polite, hollow, I am sorry for your losses," she said. "Can you work hard?" "Yes, Ma." "Can you be trusted?" A pause not from uncertainty, from the weight of being asked seriously. "Yes, Ma." "Good." Mama looked at the cook. "Show her where to put her things." That was all. That was how it began. 9 years is a long time to live inside a family's house. You learn things that were not meant to be learned, not secrets exactly, but the texture of a household, the things that are said, and the things that are carefully left unsaid. The particular rhythm that a home settles into, the way a river settles into its banks. Ease learned that Tunde Okonkwo, who was 25 when she arrived, and who came home from the office most nights after 9, was quieter than his position implied. She learned that Mama Okonkwo made every decision in that household that mattered, including, it turned out, many decisions that technically belonged to the company board, because the staff and the advisors had all understood over the years that if Mama had a strong feeling about something, the something would eventually move in the direction she felt. She learned that Mama had a habit of sitting in the back garden with her Bible at 6 in the morning, exactly 40 minutes, before the household woke up properly. She learned that if you brought tea to her in those 40 minutes, she would accept it with a look that meant more than thank you. It meant, "I see you, and I am glad you are here." Ease brought the tea every morning for 9 years, not because anyone told her to, because she wanted to. There are people who move through the world and make other people feel, without effort, that their presence is a specific and valuable thing. Mama Okonkwo was one of those people. She would stop in the middle of an arrangement, flowers, letters, whatever was in her hands, and turn to Ease and say, "What are you thinking about?" As though the answer genuinely interested her. She would say, "Ease, come and give me your opinion on this," when she was deciding something about the house. And then she would listen with the same attention she gave to lawyers and architects and the serious men who came to discuss Tunde's business affairs. "You have a good mind," she said to Ease once, on a Tuesday afternoon, when Ease was 22, and had quietly reorganized the household accounts into a system that saved Sani 3 hours every Monday morning. Mama had looked at the new system for a while, then looked at Ease. "You have been wasting it on laundry." "I don't mind laundry, Ma. That is not what I am saying. What do you want?" Not what you have, what do you want? If the circumstances were different. Ease thought about it. She had not been asked that question in a long time. She said, I would like to study business, Ma. Accounting, specifically. Mama said nothing that day. She nodded once and went back to what she was doing. 3 weeks later, she came to Ease's small room in the evening and set 2 books on the table. Introduction to Financial Accounting and Business Management Principles, both 3rd edition, both with a bookshop receipt folded inside. She said, read these at night. I will find you someone to help with what you cannot understand alone. Then she left. That was how Mama Okonkwo worked. She did not deliver speeches about potential or opportunity. She simply, quietly, moved the thing that was blocking the direction the person was already facing. Ease learned this about her. She also learned that Mama noticed everything, every person who came through the gate, every visitor who sat in the parlor, every exchange between people who thought they were not being observed. She had eyes in the way that certain people have eyes. Not watching for information to use, but watching because everything in the world was genuinely interesting to her. This was the woman whose house Ease lived in. This was what 9 years felt like. Then Mama got sick. And then Ronki came. The illness came before Ronki, though the household did not know how serious it was until it wanted them to know. Mama Okonkwo had always been a private woman about the things that mattered most. She managed her diagnosis and her first rounds of treatment for 4 months before Tunde found out. And he found out because he came home early from a business trip to find Sani in the corridor outside her room, sitting on a wooden chair with both hands on his knees, looking at the floor. Tunde did not need to ask what the chair in the corridor meant. From that evening, everything in the house shifted in the particular way. Things shift when someone important is fighting something quietly. Ease's responsibilities changed. She had always helped with the household generally. Now she came every day to Mama's room, specifically to help with the things that became difficult. As the months went on, to sit beside her in the evenings when Mama wanted company that did not require her to perform strength she did not have. Ronke Adeyemi entered the picture in August of the following year, 4 months after the funeral. She arrived with Tunde's arm around her and a confidence that preceded her into rooms. She was beautiful in a specific way, the kind of beauty that is also a statement, that has been carefully assembled and maintained, that signals from a distance a level of investment in the self that others are expected to respect. She was 30 years old, daughter of Chief Adeyemi, of the Adeyemi Construction Group in Abuja, and she moved through spaces with the easy authority of a woman who has never been told to use the back door. The first time she came to the Okonkwo compound with Tunde, S was in the main corridor arranging a vase of Agapanthus Mama's flower, which Ease had kept buying at the Friday market because the house did not feel right without them. Ronke walked past, looked at the flowers, and said to Tunde without turning her head, "These are a bit much for a hallway. The house could use something lighter, fresher." She did not acknowledge Ease. She spoke past her, the way you speak past the furniture that holds a thing, addressing only the thing. Tunde said, "My mother loved those flowers." "Of course she did, my darling," Ronke said, and touched his arm, and they moved into the sitting room. Ease stood holding a stem of Agapanthus and felt, with a clarity that did not require words, exactly what was coming. She was correct. Ronke was not a woman who shouted. That would have been too much energy, and besides, she had discovered long ago that the quieter you delivered a humiliation, the longer it sat in the body of the person you had delivered it to. Shouting was for people who needed to prove something. Ronke did not feel she had anything to prove. She would pass Ease in the corridor and simply let something happen with her face. A small tightening around the nostrils, a barely perceptible shift of the mouth, as though she had walked into a smell she found faintly unpleasant. Ease wore nothing in the way of scent except plain soap. But you cannot argue with a wrinkled nose without making yourself look worse. One afternoon, 5 months after Ronke started coming to the house regularly, she arrived with 2 friends women from her circle, Silk and Gold, on a Tuesday. The particular boredom of people with nothing specific to do. They settled into the main sitting room. Ease came in to clear the tea things. Ronke did not stop her conversation. She simply continued, at her usual volume, to the friend beside her. The challenge with old houses, after the original owner passes, is the staff. They get comfortable. They start to forget the difference between being shown kindness and being owed something. She paused. It is a mentality thing. Some people were raised to know their level. Some were not. Her friends laughed in the agreeable way. People laugh when someone says something they would not have said themselves. Ease collected the cups and did not hurry, and did not slow down. Her face gave nothing. In the kitchen, she put the tray down. She put both palms flat on the counter and breathed. She heard Mama's voice in the back of her mind, as clearly as if the woman were standing beside the refrigerator. No one is born low, Ease. Only circumstances. She breathed again. She washed the cups. She went back to the sitting room and asked if anyone would like more hot water. There was a morning, about 3 months in, when Ronke arrived early and unexpected, and found Ease at the kitchen table with one of Mama's old textbooks, The Introduction to Financial Accounting, which Ease had been working through slowly for 2 years, returning to it in the evenings when the house was quiet. She had not hidden it because she had not expected anyone to be in the kitchen at 7 in the morning. Ronke stopped in the doorway. She looked at the book. She looked at Ease. Something happened in her expression that Ease could not precisely name. It was not quite surprise and not quite contempt, but a combination of the two, as though she had found something in an unexpected place and was deciding what category to put it in. Then she said, "That is an accounting textbook." "Yes, Ma. Why do you have an accounting textbook?" Ease said, "Mama Okonkwo gave it to me, Ma. I am studying in my evenings." Ronke looked at the book for another moment. Then she said, with the slight incredulous lightness of someone who has just heard something they find mildly preposterous, "Studying for what, exactly?" She did not wait for an answer. She went to the refrigerator, found what she had come for, and left. That was a Tuesday morning. On the following Saturday, when Ease came back to the kitchen table after dinner, the textbook was not where she had left it. She found it eventually on the small shelf in the corridor near the back entrance. The one where the cleaning supplies were stored, wedged between a bottle of floor polish and a box of steel wool. She retrieved it. She said nothing. She brought it back to her room and put it under the mattress, where it would not find its way to the cleaning supply shelf again. There was no way to prove what had happened to it. There was no need to prove it. She simply moved the book and moved her studying to a later hour and did not leave her things in shared spaces anymore. She told herself, 7 months. Keep the promise. 7 months. This was her life. This was what the 7 months between the promise and the party looked like from the inside. The promise itself happened on a Thursday evening, in October of the previous year, when the air in Mama Okonkwo's room smelled of the camphor oil. Ease rubbed on her feet each night, and the specific sweetness of the pawpaw juice the doctor had recommended she take with her evening medication. Mama had been awake, which was a good night. Her eyes were clear. She had been quiet for an hour, and Ease had been reading not the Psalms tonight, a novel Mama had asked for. A story about a woman in the north of Nigeria in the 1940s when Mama reached out and rested her hand on Ease's wrist. Ease, Ma, open the bottom drawer of that chest. The left side. Ease opened it. Inside, wrapped in a small square of kente cloth brought back from Accra in 1989, on a trip Mama had taken with her late husband, was a box, no larger than what you would use to hold a fine piece of jewelry, or a pocket watch, or something that needed to be kept safe. And placed on top of the kente cloth, a sealed white envelope, the flap closed with candle wax. On the front, in Mama's unmistakable blue ink, for Tunde. When the time comes, I need you to keep this for me, Mama said. Not Sani, not Bola. You, Ma, listen first, then speak. Mama's voice was quieter than it had been a year ago, but her authority had not diminished at all. When Tunde announces an official engagement, not a rumor, not a girlfriend, an official announcement, a public one, you will bring this to him yourself. At the occasion, you put it directly into his hands. She paused. You understand the difference between directly and approximately? Yes, Ma. Good. Because this cannot be left on a table or given to Sani to deliver. It must be you. You, personally, at the event where the engagement is being celebrated, you put it in his hands. Ease looked at the box and the envelope for a long moment. She thought about what it might mean, why it needed to be her, why it needed to be at the event, specifically, why the timing was so precise. She did not ask. Some things reveal themselves in the keeping, not in the knowing. I promise, Ma, she said. Mama let go of her wrist. She leaned back against her pillow. You are a good girl, Ease, she said quietly. I have never told you enough times. 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning at 6:44, Sani came upstairs and found Mama in her chair in the back garden, facing the early light, her Bible open on her lap. He knew before he touched her shoulder. He stood for a moment in the garden, holding his own silence, and then he went inside to call the family. Ease had already made the tea. She kept the box locked in the tin under her bed through the 40 days of mourning, through the reading of the will, through the 2 months when the house had the particular quality of a place still rearranging itself around an absence. She kept it when Tunde went to London and then to Dubai. She kept it when Ronk started coming in the mornings and staying for lunch and rearranging small things about the sitting room. Moving the photograph of Mama and Papa Okonkwo at their 25th anniversary dinner from the main shelf to a side table, saying only that the shelf looked cluttered. Ease moved the photograph back the next morning. She did it without announcement, at 6 o'clock, before anyone was awake. It was back in its place by the time Sani came down to start the day. Nobody ever said anything about it. She kept the box through those months. She kept it through every corridor comment, through every moment of being looked past, through the Tuesday sitting room performance, and the many other small performances like it. She kept it because she had made a promise, and a promise made to a person who is no longer alive to collect it is still a promise, perhaps more so, because there is no longer anyone to release you from it. The announcement came on a Thursday evening in October, 1 year, almost to the day after the conversation in Mama's room. Sani was in the kitchen looking at his phone when he made a small sound, and Ease looked over, and he turned the screen to show her Tunde's social media page. A photograph of the two of them at what appeared to be a terrace restaurant, with a ring visible on Ronke's left hand. One line of text. She said yes. To God be the glory. Sani said, Oga Tunde is engaged. Ease nodded, she said, I know. She went to her room, pulled the tin from under the bed, unlocked it, and sat on the edge of her mattress, holding the box and the envelope for a long time. She thought about Mama. She thought about the kente cloth, and the blue ink, and the wax seal. She thought about the promise. Then she went to look for a piece of brown paper. She spent 20 minutes that evening wrapping the box, carefully folding the corners the way Mama had once showed her, making the edges clean, tying the string in a proper bow. It was not a beautiful package. It was not trying to be. It was simply wrapped with attention, which was a different thing. The day before the engagement party, Ronk called Ease into the sitting room. She was in the announcing mood, the particular ease of a woman who has just secured something significant. Ease stood in the doorway. "The party is tomorrow evening," Ronk said, without looking up from the planner on her lap. "You will serve drinks. Not food, the caterers handle food. Drinks only, and you will wear your good uniform, not the washed-out one. 6 o'clock. She flipped a page. "And Ease, do not bring any present. That is not appropriate for an occasion like this. The guests attending tomorrow are not people from your world. What you would consider a proper gift would not be appropriate in that room. Do you understand what I am saying?" Ease said, "Yes, Ma. Good. 6 o'clock. Drinks." Ease went back to the kitchen. She looked at the brown paper package sitting on the small shelf above her personal items. She looked at it for a moment, then she put it in her bag next to her good uniform and she went to bed. The next evening she arrived at 6. She changed into her uniform. She began her work. The party settled into itself the way parties do, through 3 distinct stages. The stiff early arrivals who stand too formally and talk about traffic. Then the loosening that comes with the first glass. Then the warm third gear, where everyone decides they are enjoying themselves. And the real conversations begin. Ease moved through all 3 stages with a tray of drinks, efficient and quiet, the way she had moved through rooms for 9 years. The hall smelled of the decorator's French rose spray, the same scent he had used on the walls, which had seemed elegant when Ease first noticed it at 5:30, but was now, 2 hours later, slightly overwhelming. The caterers had set up along the south wall, with a level of professionalism that impressed even Ease, who had managed enough events in this house to have standards. The music was live, a 6-piece band that played Afrobeats arrangements of older high-life songs, which meant the older guests could recognize what they were hearing, and the younger guests could dance to it. A diplomatic choice that had clearly been thought through. Ease moved through all of it the way she always moved through events in this house, taking up exactly the space the work required, and no more, refilling, offering, stepping back. She knew how to be present and absent in the same motion. It was a skill she had developed over 9 years, and it was a useful one, because it meant she heard things. People talked freely in front of her, the same way they talked freely in front of furniture, not from cruelty, simply from the habit of not registering her as an audience. She heard Chief Oladosu's wife tell her friend, "The decorator is Desmond from Abuja. He does this same glass installation for every party. I have seen it 3 times. She heard 2 of the younger businessmen near the bar debating whether Okonkwo Holdings was planning to expand into the north, the kind of conversation they would have lowered their voices. For if they had registered that a member of the household staff was within earshot, carrying a tray 3 feet away. She heard Ronke laughing at something across the room, and recognized the particular pitch of that laugh, not the real one, the slightly louder, performing one that she used in groups. She watched Tunde across the room. He was the same as he had always been in social gatherings, present but slightly apart from the energy, listening more than he spoke, with the particular stillness of someone who has been told too many times that their attention is a valuable thing to give. He looked well. She was glad for that. He had lost weight after Mama died. The way men do when a woman who fed them correctly is no longer there. and he had put some of it back in the past several months. At one point, he looked across the room, and their eyes crossed not intentionally, just the way eyes crossed in a crowded space, and he gave her the small nod he had always given her at household events, the brief acknowledgement that she was doing her work well. She had always appreciated that nod. It had always been small enough that nobody else would have noticed. It was anything more than a man glancing across a room. She waited until the party reached its third gear. Then she went to the anteroom, opened her bag, and took out the package. She held it for a moment, brown paper and string, in a room full of Desmond's peonies and suspended glass installations. The most unremarkable thing in the building, she thought. Mama, I am going now. Then she walked back into the hall. Ronka was standing at the center of the room, with 3 women from her circle, all of them mid-law. All of them assembled with the particular elegance of women, who have spent years learning which fabrics, and which jewelry, and which posture say the right things. Her rose-gold asso oak had beading that caught the light every time she moved, which was often. Ys approached. She held the package in both hands, held at the correct height to indicate it was being offered. One of Ronka's friends saw her first and went quiet. The second friend followed. Ronka turned. She looked at Ys, then at the package, then at the string, then back at Ys's face. The expression that arrived was not contempt. Immediately it was confusion first. The expression of someone confronting a thing so outside their expectation of reality that their mind is still processing the information. Then the confusion settled. She turned to her friends. She held the package up for them to see. God forbid. Her voice was light, conversational, designed to carry. You brought me a gift? In this? My sister is this newspaper. She turned it over, examining the wrapping the way you examine something that has arrived with the wrong label. Can you imagine our house girl has brought a present to my own engagement party? Wrapped in brown paper. She laughed softly. Thank you, Ys. Really, but this is. She tilted her hand. The package fell from approximately waist height, hit the marble floor corner first, and popped open on impact. A small box in dark navy velvet, no larger than a man's closed fist, and a sealed white envelope, with writing on the front in blue ink. The envelope skidded across the floor on the smooth marble, spinning slowly, and came to rest against the shoe of a guest standing 2 meters away. The velvet box rolled and stopped against the leg of a nearby chair. Ronka looked down at them briefly. Leave it, she said. The cleaners will pick it up later. She turned back to her friends. She said something low and conspiratorial, and they all laughed. And the conversation found its level again and kept going. And Ys stood where she was standing and did not move. 30 people saw this happen. Not one of them moved to help her. Ys stood for a moment looking at the scattered contents on the floor. She was aware of her own breathing. She was aware of the music still playing, and the glasses clinking, and the sound of Ronki's friends laughing at the thing she had just said. She was aware that she was standing in a room full of people and was completely, specifically alone in it. Then she bent her knees and lowered herself to the floor. In her staff uniform and her flat shoes, in the middle of the Okonkwo engagement party, Eshe Nwosu knelt on the marble and began to pick up the things. A pair of shoes stepped around her without stopping. A dress swept past her shoulder. Nobody said anything. What none of the 30 people in that circle noticed, because they were all looking at Ronki, or at their drinks, or at each other, was a man standing on the far side of the room, near the 3rd pillar from the window, holding a glass of plain water. He was 61 years old, and he had worked in this house for 27 years, longer than Tunde had been alive, and he was standing very still. Sani Bello had carried Tunde home from the hospital the day he was born. He had helped Mama Okonkwo lower her late husband into the ground. He had sat in this garden on 63 Saturday mornings and listened to a woman tell him about her life. And in those 63 mornings, he had read more letters and more notes and more shopping lists in her handwriting than he could count. He recognized it immediately. The blue ink on the white envelope, lying face up on the marble floor. For Tunde, when the time comes. He crossed the room without hurrying. He reached the envelope before the next pair of shoes could pass it. He picked it up. He picked up the velvet box. He stood upright. He read the front of the envelope 3 times, though he already knew what it said. He looked across the room to where Ronki was now talking to the bartender about whether there was any of the specific rose she had specified on the drinks list. He looked down at the envelope in his hand. He turned around. He went to find Bola. Bola Okonkwo was 56 years old, Tunde's father's only surviving sibling, and she had the directness that ran through that family like a seam of iron, through stone, not rudeness, but the particular efficiency of a person who has spent a lifetime moving through situations that required her to know exactly what was happening and respond to it exactly. She was standing near the window, not quite in any conversation, watching the room with the attention of a woman who has learned that what matters in any gathering is not what people say, but what they are doing with their hands. Sani materialized at her left shoulder. He did not speak. He held out the envelope and the velvet box. Bola looked at them. She looked at the handwriting on the front. She took the envelope from him and turned it over and turned it back and read the front again. For Tunde, when the time comes. She stood completely still for a count of perhaps 5 seconds. Then, where did this come from? The maid, Is Nwosu. She brought it tonight as a gift. Ronke threw the box. Bola's eyes went across the room. They found Is first still near the edge of the hall, standing by the wall, the empty brown paper and the string in her hands. Then they found Ronke, who was now at the center of the room, laughing at something with perfect ease, one hand on the arm of a woman in a green jeel. Bola looked at the envelope one more time. "Get Tunde," she said. "Right now." Tunde Okonkwo was in the side corridor outside the main hall, in conversation with Chukwuma Okafor from Port Harcourt, who had correctly calculated that a social occasion was a better place than a scheduled meeting. To raise the subject of a joint acquisition they had been circling for 6 months. Tunde was listening with full attention. He always listened that way, which was one of the things people noticed about him, and one of the things that made him difficult to rush. His aunt appeared at the end of the corridor. She did not say his name. She simply looked at him. He said, "Excuse me one moment," to Okafor, who was used to Bola Okonkwo's interruptions and accepted them as part of the Okonkwo Holdings experience, and he walked toward her. She held out the envelope and the velvet box. He looked at them. He looked at the front of the envelope. He knew that handwriting the way you know, the handwriting of someone who has written you birthday cards and permission slips and personal notes your entire life. He knew it the way you know a voice. He stood in the corridor, holding his mother's last letter, at the party celebrating his engagement, in front of his aunt, who was watching his face carefully and not saying anything. "Where did this come from?" he said. "Is brought it tonight. Is brought." He stopped. He looked again at the envelope. "Ronk threw the box," Bola said. Sani picked this up off the floor. Something passed across his face that was not anger. It was something quieter and harder than anger. He looked at the envelope for a moment longer. Then he walked back into the main hall. He went to the center of the room. He said, in a voice that did not need volume to carry authority, Can I have everyone's attention, please? The music stopped. Someone turned a dial. The conversations finished their sentences and went quiet. The way a room goes quiet when it understands something important is happening, even before it knows what. 43 people looked at him. Thank you, he said. He held up the envelope. I am going to read something. I apologize for interrupting the evening. I believe you will understand why in a moment. He opened the envelope carefully. The way you open something you know, you will never be able to reseal. He took out the letter 2 pages, handwritten, both sides of the first page and half of the second. He read it first with his eyes, standing there in the center of the room, his face changing with each paragraph in the way faces change when something true lands in an open place. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Somewhere outside, the garden fountain was running, and they could hear it through the open window, and that was the only sound. He reached the bottom of the first page. He turned it. He kept reading. Those standing close enough to observe him, Chief Oladosu, who was 3 meters away. Dr. Fashola, who had positioned himself near the window, said later that the remarkable thing was how still he became as he read. Not stiff, not frozen still. The particular stillness of someone who is absorbing something that requires their full capacity and cannot spare any of it for external performance. His breathing was even. His hands were steady. He did not look up. He reached the second page. He read the postscript last, and when he did, something changed in his face that none of the observers could describe precisely afterward, something brief, that was there and then controlled, the way a man controls the expression that wants to come, when he reads his mother's handwriting and recognizes her voice in it, and understands that this is the last time he will ever hear it for the first time. He looked up. His eyes found Ronke across the room. They stayed there for a moment long enough that Ronke, who had been watching him, read with an expression of careful composure, became aware that the moment was lasting longer than she had planned for. Then his eyes moved to the far wall where Ease was standing. He looked at her for a long moment, too. Then he looked back at the letter. Then he began to read aloud. My Tunde boy, if you are reading this, then the girl I gave this letter to has kept her promise. That does not surprise me. That is exactly the kind of person she is. I am writing this on an evening in October, from my bed, on a night when the pain is low and my mind is clear. I have learned in these months that clarity is not something to waste when it comes. You use it. I have been saving this letter for the right moment. The right moment is now. There are things I could not bring myself to say while I was still breathing, because a mother does not want to place shadows on her child's joy while she is still alive to see the joy. I wanted you to have happiness, Tunde. I wanted you to fall in love and feel what your father and I felt, that particular thing that does not need to be explained to someone who has found it, and cannot be explained to someone who has not. But I am not there now, and the dead are released from the obligation to spare the living discomfort, so I will say what I need to say. I have been watching. I was ill for longer than anyone knew, and in those extra months before you were told, I watched everyone who came into this house. I paid attention not to what they said, which is easy to manage and easy to perform, but to how they behaved in the moments they thought nothing important was happening. A woman came to see me once when I was bedridden. She came with you. She sat in the chair by the window. She was in the room for 5 minutes. She told you the room smelled of illness and suggested you open more windows. Then she left. Your father used to say that a still tongue in a wise head sees everything. I watched her in those 5 minutes, Tunde. I watched her look at our photographs on the wall, your father and I at our wedding, You at 6 years old on the beach at Tarqua Bay, and I watched what was on her face. There was nothing there. Not contempt, not warmth, nothing. Just the expression of someone calculating the minimum time they were required to remain in an uncomfortable situation. In those same weeks, Eze came to my room every morning at 6 o'clock. She came on her own time before her duties began. She helped me bathe when I could no longer lift my own arms without pain. She changed my bedlin, and she never, not once, not one single time, made me feel that what she was doing was beneath her or burdensome to her. She sat on the edge of the bed, and she read to me in that clear and steady voice of hers. And she never rushed, even when I fell asleep in the middle of a chapter, even when it was late, and she had to be up early the next morning. I have been given many things in my life. I was given a good husband and a wonderful son and this house and this family. But in the final year of my life, I was given something I did not know I needed. The company of a young woman who looked at a sick, diminishing, increasingly helpless old woman and never once allowed me to feel less than fully human. There is something I know now that I did not know when I was your age, Tunde. Something I could not have explained to you when you were young, because you have to live long enough to see it proved many times before it becomes knowledge rather than opinion. You will never truly know a person's character by how they treat you. You will know it, with certainty, by how they treat the person who can do nothing for them. Watch how a person speaks to the man who parks their car. Watch what they do when a waiter makes an error. Watch what happens in the 5 minutes when no one important is looking. That is when you see who they actually are. The woman you are planning to marry. I watched those 5 minutes. I prayed I was wrong. I prayed for 4 months. But I am a dying woman, and the dying do not have the luxury of comfortable pretending. Inside the velvet box with this letter is my engagement ring. Your father designed it himself in 1972 with a jeweler named Mr. Femi Adeyenka on Broad Street, a man of great patience, because your father had very specific ideas about what he wanted, and it took 11 visits and 3 months to get it right. I have worn it for 40 years. It does not have a price because some things should not be priced. I am leaving it to you with one instruction. Give it to the woman who can look at someone who serves her and see a full human being. Give it to the woman who would have sat with me longer than 5 minutes. Not because it was useful to her, but because it was the right thing to do. If the woman you have chosen treated the girl who brought this letter with cruelty, my son, you already have your answer. I trust you to know what to do with it. I did not raise you to confuse a beautiful surface for a beautiful heart. I love you more than I have ever had the right words for. I have loved you since before you were born, and I will love you long after this letter. All my love, always your mama. P.S. Please tell Eze that I know she kept her promise. Tell her I said she is a good girl, and that I am proud of her, and that the world is going to be very surprised by her one day. And tell Sani his tea is always too sweet. Even now, I can say it. When Tunde finished reading, the room held itself. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved toward the bar, or turned to make a remark to the person next to them. The garden fountain ran. The chandelier light fell on 43 people standing still, and on the marble floor where, 40 minutes ago, a package had scattered its contents, and someone had walked past without stopping. Tunde folded the letter. He set it on the nearest table. Then he opened the velvet box. He held it so the room could see. Several of the older guests recognized it immediately. Chief Oladosu's wife put her hand over her mouth. Dr. Fashola, who had treated Mama Okonkwo through the final stages of her illness, and had been in this house many times over those years, took a single step backward, then caught himself. The ring had been at every significant Okonkwo family occasion for 4 decades. Mama's hand had been in photographs at Tunde's graduation, at his father's funeral, at the opening of the first Okonkwo Holdings building on Awolowo Road in 2001. The ring in those photographs was this ring. There was a long silence. Then Ronka said, "Tun, Zen." Her voice had shifted. The easy confidence was still there by habit, but underneath it something else had arrived, something that did not have her full control yet. "Tund, darling, listen to me. Your mother was very ill. She was in pain. She wrote this in a difficult state of mind. You know how illness can affect." Ronk, just her name. No volume, no heat. Just her name, in a tone that had the particular quality of finality the sound a door makes not when it is slammed, but when it is closed properly, with the latch engaged. He looked at her. The room watched him look at her. And what was in his face was not anger that would have been easier, in a way, for everyone, but something more considered and more final than anger. He was a man who had just been given information he could not unknow. And he was accepting the weight of it in real time, in front of witnesses, without making it smaller than it was. "I am sorry," he said. He meant it completely. That was the most disorienting thing about his expression, the genuine sorrow in it. He was not performing regret. He was actually regretful for the time, for the public circumstance, perhaps for what he himself had not seen clearly enough until tonight. This engagement is over. Ronke stood completely still for 3 seconds, then. "Tunde, you cannot do this here. In front of all these, I am sorry," he said again, and he turned. He walked across the hall. He walked past the bar and the canap table, and the suspended glass installation, and 43 people who were very carefully looking at whatever was directly in front of them. He walked to the far wall, to the edge of the room, where a woman in a house staff uniform was standing with her back to the marble, holding an empty piece of brown paper and a length of string, the remains of a package that had taken her 20 minutes to wrap. The night before, he stopped in front of her. "Ease." She looked up. Her eyes were dry. She had kept them dry through the evening, through an act of will she had been performing for years. Because there was no one in that room to absorb her feelings. And feelings that have nowhere to go will eat you alive if you let them out too early. "My mother trusted you with the most precious thing she had," Tunde said. "And I did not protect you tonight. I did not see what was happening in this room, and I should have seen it. I am sorry." She looked at him for a long moment. He had said her name. He had said it the way Mama Okonkwo had always said it, not as a direction or a summons, but as a recognition. As a way of saying, "I know you are here. I know you are a person. I am speaking to you, specifically." She had not heard her name said that way by anyone other than Mama in a very long time. 2 tears came. Not a collapse, 2 tears, running straight down the left side and then the right, quiet and unchecked, and she did not wipe them immediately because she was too busy keeping her voice steady. "I kept my promise, Ma," she said. "Not to Tunde, not to the room. To someone who was not there and who was, in a way, everywhere." Nobody in the room said a word. After Tunde walked away from Ronke, the party did not immediately end. Parties have a momentum of their own that outlasts any particular event within them, the way a river continues to flow after a stone has been thrown into it. People picked up their drinks. The band, after a hesitation of approximately 45 seconds, during which the musicians exchanged glances, began playing again. The conversations restarted, slowly, with the careful quality of conversations that are really about what just happened, but are not saying so directly. Bola Okonkwo crossed the room to where Easy was still standing against the wall. She stood beside her for a moment, without speaking, which in Bola's language was the equivalent of a long embrace. Then she said, "Come, let me get you some water." She took Ease to the small anteroom off the corridor, the room the staff used for breaks, and she poured 2 glasses of water from the jug on the counter. And she sat down in one of the plastic chairs and gestured for Ease to sit in the other. And they sat together in the small room while the party continued its diminished momentum outside. Bola said, "She told you not to come, didn't she?" Ease said, "Yes, ma, but you came anyway." "Yes, ma." Bola looked at her glass for a moment. "My sister-in-law," she said finally, "was a stubborn woman. In the best possible way. She believed that things should be done correctly, and she did not accept that difficulty was a reason not to do them correctly." She paused. "You reminded her of herself. I need you to know that. She told me about 3 years ago that you reminded her of herself when she was young. That is not a small thing, coming from Adunola Okonkwo." Eze held her water glass with both hands and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would be adequate. "Drink your water," Bola said. "Then go home and rest. Tomorrow is going to be a different kind of day." After that night, some things happened and some things did not happen. Ronke Adiemi left the party 40 minutes after Tunde walked away from her. She left with her 2 friends and her rose gold aso oak. In the car her mother had sent, when her mother received the phone call from a cousin who had been in the room and relayed what had happened in a low, urgent voice. There was no scene in the departure, no door slammed, no public confrontation beyond what had already occurred. Ronke was, if nothing else, a woman who understood timing, and she understood that the time for counter-arguments had passed when the letter was read aloud in front of 43 people. Chief Adeyemi's office contacted Tunde's legal team the following week through the appropriate professional channels. The language was measured and careful, the language of men who have spent careers managing the aftermath of other people's decisions. The discussions that followed were brief and resolved without complexity. The engagement ring was returned by courier in its box. The deposits on 2 venues that had been booked for events related to the wedding were forfeited. The professional relationship between the Adeyemi Group and Okonkwo Holdings was, after some months, repositioned into a distance that was not hostile, but was understood by all parties involved to be permanent. Lagos talked about it, because Lagos always talks. But the story that went around the dinner tables, and the sitting rooms, and the private messages, was not the story of a public humiliation or a fallen engagement. What people repeated to each other, what those who had been in the room told those who had not, was the letter. People who had not attended the party asked for it to be told to them. They asked what exactly she had written, what the exact words were. Because there was something in those words that people recognized something they had felt before, but had not heard. Stated that precisely. You will never truly know a person's character by how they treat you. You will know it by how they treat the person who can do nothing for them. Dr. Fashola sent those 2 sentences to his full medical staff on the Monday morning following the party, in a message that did not say where the words came from because they felt too intimate to attribute publicly, and too important to keep to himself. He had been standing in that room and had thought, hearing them read aloud, that he himself could do better at this. That thought stayed with him longer than the evening did. Chief Oladosu's wife, who had been coming to the Okonkwo house for 23 years, and had known Mama Okonkwo since before Tunde was born, sat in her car in the driveway for 11 minutes after the party ended, before she could compose herself to drive. She had not known. She told her husband later that Adunola had left a letter. She had not known Adunola had understood the situation so clearly and said nothing. She had not known the girl with the tea tray had been carrying something that heavy for 7 months. "That woman," she said to her husband, in the dark of their car at midnight. Even when she was gone, she was still managing everything. 3 weeks after the party, Tunde called Ease into his father's study room, with one wall of family photographs, where Mama had done her most important work in the later years, and he sat down across from her at the desk. "I want to ask you something," he said. "I want you to answer honestly." "Yes, sir. My mother told me once that you were interested in studying business, accounting." A pause. "She told you that?" "She mentioned it, yes. Some time ago." He was quiet for a moment. "Do you still want it?" Ease looked at the wall of photographs, at Mama in a yellow dress at what appeared to be a garden celebration, laughing at something outside the frame of the image. She had not looked at that photograph in months. She had been avoiding the study since the funeral, because the room smelled of Mama's work, and she was not ready for it. She said, "I never stopped wanting it. I only had no way to start. Then I want to tell you about something I am building." He leaned forward. "I am setting up a foundation in my mother's name. One of its functions will be to fund education for people in domestic and service work who want to continue studying. People who came to this city with nothing and are trying to build something." He paused. "The first scholarship will go to you." Ease opened her mouth, he said, before she could respond. "It is not charity. My mother invested in you for 9 years. She bought you textbooks. She found you a tutor. She chose you to carry the most important thing she had in her possession. This is simply what comes next in that investment. Say yes." She looked at him for a long moment, at the photographs behind him, at the man who had read his mother's words aloud in a room full of people and had not looked away from what those words meant. "Yes, sir," she said. "Thank you." She began at Lagos Business School in January, 4 months after the party, at 27 years old, in the morning intake cohort. The first day was the most frightening she could remember, since the day she had walked through the Okonkwo gate at 18, with a cracked sandal and a church letter. She sat in a classroom where everyone around her moved with the particular authority of people who had always expected to be in rooms like that room, and she thought, for the first 90 seconds, "I am not supposed to be here." Then she heard Mama's voice. Not a memory of a voice, something more specific than that. The exact sound, the exact cadence. "No one is born low, Ez. Only circumstances." She opened her notebook. She wrote the date January 14th, and her name at the top of the page. She underlined it once. Then she began. The first semester was difficult in the specific way that things are difficult when you are doing them correctly. She found some concepts she had already half understood from the textbooks Mama had given her, which was a small mercy in an otherwise steep landscape. She found other concepts that required her to sit with her notes at 11 o'clock at night, after a full day of classes and housework, reading the same paragraph 4 times before it settled. She did not complain about this to anyone, because complaining would have required explaining the situation, and the situation was not the kind she found easy to explain. She passed her first semester examinations with results that surprised her professor enough that he looked up from the grading sheet and then back at it, and then wrote a note in his book. She did not know about the note until second semester, when he stopped her after class and said, "You have a good mind for this. Where did you study before?" She told him. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Well, keep going." She kept going. She still came to the Okonkwo house on Saturday mornings, and 3 weekday mornings before her afternoon classes. She had chosen this herself, when Tunde offered her the option to step away entirely. She did it not because she was obliged to, but because the house still felt like Mama in the way that places hold the people who lived fully inside them. And she was not ready to leave that yet. There was no shame in that. Sani had begun taking less sugar in his tea on his own initiative, without comment. He claimed this was about his health and had nothing to do with a postscript in a letter. Nobody believed him, and nobody pressed him on it. Because some things are more dignified when they are allowed to be private. The agapanthus were back on the main shelf by the stairs, had been there since the morning after the engagement party, when Ease arrived at 6 o'clock and moved them from the side table where they had spent the last 6 months and put them back where Mama had always kept them. Tunde noticed on his way down to breakfast that morning. He stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked at them for a moment. He did not say anything. He went to the kitchen and made his coffee. But Ease, who was coming out of the pantry at that moment with a tray, caught the look on his face, and it was a look she recognized. It was the look of someone who has just been reminded of something they did not know they had been missing. She kept buying the agapanthus on Friday mornings from the same woman at the market on Adesanya Street. She kept them in the hall alcove. They were not expensive. They were simply the right flower for that space, which was a thing Mama had understood, and which Ease intended to maintain as long as she was in the house. Some things do not need to be justified. They just need to be continued. The Okonkwo Dignity Foundation held its official opening on the 14th of February, not for any sentimental reason, but because Tunde's logistics team confirmed that the venue was available only on that date, and he was not a man given to attaching significance to calendar dates that had not earned it. The launch was modest. 41 people, a short speech, tea and chin-chin and small chops arranged on a long table near the window. No chandeliers, no imported wine, no peonies from Abuja. The foundation's purpose was stated simply on a single page: to fund the continued education and professional development of domestic workers, service staff, and first-generation Lagos arrivals across the state. The application form asked 3 questions only. What do you do now? What do you want to learn? What is standing in the way? In its first year of operation, the foundation received 237 applications. It funded 42. Ease was not on the selection committee that would have been a conflict, she had said, and Tunde had agreed without hesitation. But she spoke at the first orientation evening for the recipients, standing at the front of a room of 42 people who had applied for something and been told yes. And she said, "I want to tell you something that someone gave me when I was 18 and had nothing and did not know if anything was going to get better." She said, "No one is born low, only circumstances." She said it as though it were obvious, as though I should have already known it, which is exactly the right way to say a thing that is true. Because true things are not discoveries, they are recognitions. She paused. Someone coughed softly. You recognized it too when you filled in that application form. You recognize that where you are now is not where you were born to stay. That is the only credential you needed. She looked around the room. The rest is just work, and we all know how to do that. She sat down. The applause started slowly, and then the whole room joined it, and she looked at her hands in her lap until it was over. The velvet box sat in the top drawer of Tunde's desks. Behind a row of pens and a small framed photograph, Mama in the back garden at 6 in the morning, teacup in hand, looking at something to the left of the camera, smiling at whatever it was. The photographer had not known what she was looking at, and no one alive could say now. Tunde opened the drawer sometimes. He looked at the ring. He thought about what his mother had written. Give it to the woman who can look at someone who serves her and see a full human being. He thought about the simplicity of that as a standard and about how it had managed to be, simultaneously, the simplest thing he had ever heard and the most difficult to fulfill, not because the standard itself was extreme, but because it required a quality of attention to other people that could not be performed and could not be faked and could not be assembled from the outside. He was 34 years old. He had learned, in the 7 months since that evening, that what he thought he had known about reading people was less complete than he had believed it to be. This was useful information, even though it had arrived in the most inconvenient and public way possible. His mother had tried, across 34 years, to teach him to ask the right questions. He had nodded and agreed and understood it, intellectually, the way you understand things that have not yet happened to you. It had taken a letter from beyond her death to make it land in the body. The ring would wait. It had waited 40 years to leave her hand. It could wait a little longer. There is something I want to sit with you in for a moment, not as a narrator, but as someone who has thought about this story for a long time and still thinks about it. We talk, as a society, with great sophistication about success. Who deserves it, how it is built, what it costs, whether the people who have it earned it correctly. We have very complicated opinions about wealth and poverty and the moral meaning of both. What we almost never discuss, what we leave almost entirely unexamined, is the question Mama Okonkwo built her last act around. How does a person treat someone who cannot help them? Not cannot help them yet. Cannot help them. Full stop. The waiter who made the wrong order. The woman cleaning the corridor outside the boardroom. The man at the gate you pass every morning without looking at. The girl standing in your entrance hall holding a tea tray. What does a person do with those moments? What do they do with the ordinary invisible ones? The seconds nobody is recording. The interactions that leave no evidence. Ease did not change her behavior because anyone was watching. She kept her promise because she had made it. And to the one person in her life who had told her she was worth paying attention to, she was not going to return anything less than her full faithfulness. She carried that box for 7 months. She walked across that floor knowing what Ronki might do. Because Ronki had already shown her, in 6 months of corridor comments and sitting room performances, exactly what she was capable of when she thought nothing important was happening. Ease walked across that floor anyway. That is not a small thing. That is the whole thing. Ronka showed her character in 5 minutes. In the 5 minutes she spent beside a woman's sickbed, in a room she found uncomfortable, doing the minimum the occasion required and leaving. That is all it took. 5 minutes and a single sentence about how the room smelled. Ease showed hers across 9 years and 7 months, in 6 o'clock tea trays, in washed linen, in textbooks read by lamplight in a small room, in a brown paper package carried across a marble floor in front of 30 people who did not move. The lesson here is not that good things always come to good people. That would be a comfortable lie, and this story is not interested in comfortable lies. Good people have terrible things happen to them every day. That is the world as it actually is, not the world as we would prefer it to be. The lesson is simpler than that, and harder to live than it sounds. Do not let the world teach you to treat people as invisible. Every person you walk past, every gate man, every waiter, every person with a mop and a uniform and a job that required them to arrive early so that your morning could go smoothly, every one of them has a name, a history, and a dignity that was there before you arrived and will still be there after you leave. That dignity does not depend on what they earn, or who they know, or what they are wearing. And here is the thing nobody tells you. But Mama Okonkwo understood it and wrote it down for her son in the last months of her life. You cannot hide who you actually are from people who are paying attention. You can manage your reputation and control your public presentation. And choose your words in the rooms where it matters, but in the small moments, in the unrehearsed 5 minutes, in the interaction with the person who can do nothing for you, you will eventually, always, show yourself. Ronke showed herself. Ease showed herself. And a woman who was no longer alive to witness it had understood, 7 cents in advance, exactly how it would go. Because some people, the rare ones, the ones who last, never stop watching, and never stop paying attention, and never stop believing that how you treat the least regarded person in the room tells you more about a human being than anything else you will ever observe. That was Mama Okonkwo's gift. Not the ring, not the letter, the attention, the simple, steadfast belief that every person in a room is worth seeing. That is the thing worth keeping. Personal reflection. I have told you this story because I believe it. Not because it happened in exactly this way. Stories find their shape in the telling. And the truth in a story is not always the same as the facts, but because the human experience it describes is real. I have seen people like Mama Okonkwo. I have seen people like Ease, people who carry their dignity so quietly you might miss it entirely if you are not paying attention. And I have seen, more times than I wish I had, what happens when someone in a position of power treats the people around them as though they do not exist. There is a particular kind of arrogance that does not know it is arrogance. It does not shout. It does not make scenes. It simply looks past people, past the gate man, past the person clearing the plates, past the woman holding the tray with the easy confidence of someone who has never been asked to justify that behavior to anyone who could make them. It feels like nothing from the inside. It feels like simply moving through the world at your own level, which happens to be higher than the levels of certain other people around you. Ronke did not think she was doing anything wrong. That is the truest and most important thing about her. She did not experience herself as cruel. She experienced herself as appropriate as someone who understood social gradations and operated within them correctly. The sitting room comment was, in her own mind, not cruelty. It was accuracy. The comment about the wrapping paper was not humiliation. It was honesty. That is what makes it hard to defend against. You cannot argue with a person who does not believe they have done anything requiring argument. But the woman you cannot argue with is not the person who carries the letter. I want you to think about the last time you were in a room with someone who had less power than you. Maybe it was a driver, or a security guard, or someone who refilled your glass without being thanked. Maybe it was someone you walked past in a corridor without acknowledging. Maybe it was the person who cleaned the office, bathroom, that you use every morning, whose name you do not know because you never thought to ask. What did you do with that moment? Not the important moments, not the moments when someone is watching. The other ones, the quiet, ordinary, unrecorded ones, the ones that leave no evidence. What do you do with those? That is the question Mama left open. That is the question Ease answered across 9 years and 7 months. I think it is worth sitting with. I think it might be worth more than sitting with. I think it is worth acting on tomorrow morning in the first ordinary moment that arrives where someone around you could go either seen or unseen. See them. That is all. That is the whole thing.